Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 14, the Regional Airports Authorities Act. This bill provides a framework for incorporating airport authorities in Alberta. And Mr. Speaker, these authorities will be responsive to local needs and priorities and will function as an economic development tool for the regions that they represent. It's also noteworthy, Mr. Speaker, this is the first legislation of its kind in Canada.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Trade has moved first reading of Bill 14, Regional Airports Authorities Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 14, Regional Airports Authorities Act, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Elzinga, is now read a first time.
Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, Bill 17, being the Department of Public Works, Supply and Services Amendment Act 1989. The purpose of Bill 17 is to amend the procedures for the sale of some public lands and to establish authority for the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services to provide services with respect to the construction of certain health care facilities.
The Honourable Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services has moved first reading of Bill 17, Department of Public Works, Supply and Services Amendment Act 1989. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 17, Department of Public Works, Supply and Services Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Kowalski, is now read a first time.
Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill number PR2, the General Hospital Grey Nuns of Edmonton Amendment Act 1989. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is to correct a minor inconsistency in the name of the hospital as well as to save the hospital thousands of dollars.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre has moved first reading of Bill PR2, General Hospital Grey Nuns of Edmonton Amendment Act 1989. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number PR2, General Hospital Grey Nuns of Edmonton Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the Honourable Member Reverend Mr. Roberts, is now read a first time.
Drayton Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce the Jerry Dan Kovacs Legal Articles Act, Bill number PR 12. The purpose of this bill is to allow the Law Society of Alberta the flexibility in setting the required articles in Alberta to be served by a person who is in the process of fulfilling his qualifications for the Ontario Bar.
The honourable member for Drayton Valley has moved first reading of Bill PR 12, Jerry Dan Kovacs Legal Articles Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 12, Jerry Dan Kovacs Legal Articles Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Thurber, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure to table with the Assembly the 1988 annual report of the Alberta Environmental Research Trust.
Sure.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure, sir, to introduce to you a number of individuals that are in the gallery to witness the introduction of Bill 14 today. They are individuals who've been very instrumental in putting together the legislation, and I would ask that they rise as I introduce them, and that at the conclusion of the introduction we all extend to them a very warm welcome. And I begin by introducing Mr. John Burns, the Chairman of the Calgary Transportation Authority, Mr. David Dover, President of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Peter Watson, Chairman of Edmonton's Regional Airports Task Force, Mr. John McDougall, Vice Chairman of that same task force and also President of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Ron Gilbertson, Executive Director of the Edmonton Regional Airports Task Force, Mr. Ronald Odinsky, one of the legal advisors to the task force, and Mr. Bob Rosen, Chairman of the Edmonton Economic Development Authority. And I would ask if our colleagues would extend to them a very warm welcome to the Legislative Assembly.
Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, it's certainly my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you and through to my colleagues in this legislature a longtime colleague of many of us in this House, Dr. Walter Buck, that has served this legislature and the people of Alberta for some 22 years. As many of us know, he was known in his opposition role in a very prominent way about his one-liners, which were a very interesting part of this House and will be well remembered. I want to say today that he's here with a case of split loyalty in that 18 fairways are underwater.
He wants a grant.
And he had an hour for the legislature. I'd like to welcome Dr. Buck.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure today of introducing a very special guest, Mrs. Helen Walsh of Bedford, Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Walsh is walking across Canada to draw attention to her vision of the rights of the unborn Canadians. She started her trek in May of '88 and has since traveled across 8.5 provinces, over 5,000 kilometers. Mrs. Walsh is accompanied today in the public gallery by Louise Carrier, who has driven the van accompanying Mrs. Walsh, and Corey Morcus, who is hosting Mrs. Walsh during her stay in Edmonton. I would ask them to stand now and receive the warm welcome of this legislature.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you to members of the legislature, Mr. Ralph Melnichuk. He has been the Secretary of the Edmonton Highlands Liberal Association and is a newly appointed lecturer at the Grand Prairie College. I would ask that he rise in the gallery and receive the warm welcome of the members of the legislature.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier's written statement to the Code Inquiry was carefully written to hoodwink the Alberta public. Mr. Speaker, to make us think that the Premier had no knowledge of problems at FIC, AIC, between taking office in the spring of 1987. Mr. Speaker, we know that within 18 days of taking office, the Premier received a document detailing the company's problems and telling him that government action might be necessary. So what we have, Mr. Speaker, is a 14-month credibility gap. Mr. Speaker, his submission was at best a half-truth, and all Albertans know it. I have a very simple question to ask the Premier. Did the Premier read the document provided for him by Mr. Hyndman?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how many times you want me to answer the first question, but I want to tell the members of the legislature, through you, Mr. Speaker, that the government will be making a full reply to the code report when it has assessed and completed its review of that report. And we are not going to start to respond to certain small parts of it in the question period. There will be full response from the government when we have assessed the report and are then making a statement to the people of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier's role in this matter is not a small matter, Mr. Speaker.
Right. Pretty darn central.
And the people of Alberta have a right to know this, Mr. Speaker, in this Assembly. My question then to the Premier, I have to go on the assumption that he reads important documents. I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. So people want to know, and I'll ask this question, Mr. Speaker, why didn't he do something back then, before thousands more investors lost their money? Why didn't he do something then?
Mr. Speaker, these documents, as all members know, were in the code report. Mr. Code had them, and he assessed them and the review of his counsel with me and asked me to file a deposition. I was prepared all along to go before the code report. It was his decision that I not do it. And Mr. Speaker, we are not going to now start to take bits and pieces of the report in the question period.
Mr. Speaker, does the Premier not know he has a special responsibility here to tell the truth to the people of the province of Alberta? Because of his negligence, when he knew back in 1985, this is the reason we've had these problems. Why didn't he do something about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, these documents were before Mr. Code in the hands of his legal counselors, and Mr. Code held a full 2-year study of the whole matter and has now made his report. The government's assessing it and will make a statement on it.
Okay. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Back to the Premier. We're told that there'd be within a week. 1 week's almost here. But when this government told Albertans it would take that 1 week to respond to the code report, it led us to believe that it needed the time to look at the report, keeping in mind the Premier's commitment to the investors, and then they would make an appropriate response, Mr. Speaker. But obviously that wasn't the real reason. What the government really needed was a week to fight a political battle within its own caucus, Mr. Speaker, not to look at what Mr. Code said. It was rather clear what Mr. Code said, Mr. Speaker, had nothing to do with the harm to the investors or the cost to the taxpayers. What it is an internal battle within this caucus.
Now we'll have the question. Order. Now the question.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, this is the start of the second set of questions. I get the preamble. My question...
That was 2 long sentences. Let's go.
Rough night. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier. In 1987, when the Premier made his promise to compensate in event of government negligence, did he have the support of his caucus, or did he make that commitment off the top of his head as he's done before?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition surely knows that matters that are in caucus are matters private to caucus. And the decisions that are made are involved in announcements.
Mr. Speaker, the question we want to know from this Premier, and I'll repeat it without talking internally, did he have the support of his caucus when he made that commitment, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, one of the most foolish questions I've ever heard in the legislature.
Mr. Speaker, whenever he doesn't want to answer, it becomes foolish or silly, Mr. Speaker. It's not foolish or silly to the people of Alberta.
That's right. That's right.
My third question is now, Does the Premier have the support of his caucus at this moment in living up to his promises that he promised in 1987?
Do we have any additional information, Premier?
A very eloquent reply, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, indeed. Member for Edmonton Glengarry. Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, serious problems in the financial industry in Alberta prompted the Priorities Committee of Cabinet to establish two task forces in 1984 and 1985. In 1984, a task force on financial institutions, including matters relating to the Investment Contracts Act, was set up. In 1985, a special task force to monitor trust companies was established. From the Code report, we know that the Premier received a memorandum from the Provincial Treasurer with a two-page summary attached dealing with the problems of FIC and AIC. My question to the Premier is this: did not the memo, the November 1985 memo, and the two task forces alert you, Mr. Premier, to the serious problems facing the financial industry in Alberta at that time?
Mr. Speaker, I've already answered that question in the House.
I consider this to be added stonewalling and refusal to answer by you, Mr. Premier. Given that the problems in the financial industry had not improved, can you tell this Assembly, Mr. Premier, why you dissolved, why you disbanded those two task forces shortly after you became the Premier?
Mr. Speaker, decisions regarding Cabinet and Cabinet committees are very private.
Mr. Speaker, my last question is to the no-answer Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order. Order. There are enough sharing comments with respect to whether questions or answers are made. Let's go. Let's have the question.
The last question to the Premier is this: how could you expect, sir, your senior ministers to deal with problems involving the financial industry, serious financial problems? How could you expect them to deal with those problems in a greater way, a more attentive way, when you signaled to them that this wasn't a matter for concern when you disbanded those two task forces?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is incorrect.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, followed by Edmonton Centre, then Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. I wonder if the Premier has any additional information to share with the House or update the House on matters related to conflict of interest, as it's had an important point in the last 2 or 3 weeks in the legislature.
Mr. Speaker, yes, in response to various members of the Assembly, my honourable friend from Edmonton Gold Bar and others, I have decided, Mr. Speaker, rather than do a review within my office of the guidelines and legislation pertaining to conflict of interest, that I would have it done by a group of Albertans who would do the assessment and make recommendations to us.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier can share the names with the Assembly of those group of Albertans, and more importantly, the terms of reference under which they will be working and to whom they will report.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have been able to obtain the services, and I think we're very lucky in this regard, of 3 outstanding Albertans. The review panel will be 3 people. It'll be chaired by the Chief Judge of the Alberta Provincial Court, Mr. Edward Wakowicz. The other 2 members will include Dr. Walter Buck who is a former MLA, of course, and who is visiting us today and was an MLA for some 22 years. And Mr. Frank King, a Calgary businessman and former chairman of the Olympics Organizing Committee. I've asked the panel to submit its report, Mr. Speaker, with recommendations as quickly as possible, but no longer than October 31st, 1989. And I've asked them also, as I mentioned in the House, to, as a specific matter, to review the unique situation of the Alberta Energy Company in this province and the ownership of shares by senior public servants, MLAs, and ministers of the Executive Council in relation to the Alberta Energy Company. I'd say, Mr. Speaker, that this is an important matter. I believe the panel outside of the Premier's office will give us a full assessment and review. All honourable members realize how important these rules are, not just to make sure that they're comprehensive and up to date, but also recognizing that they do have an influence on the quality of people who will become involved in public life. So I'm very pleased that we have 3 outstanding Albertans who will serve the province in this way.
Supplementary question, final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Premier will inform the Assembly if he will be sharing the report of the group with the members of the Assembly.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. We would make the report available to all members of the Assembly shortly after receiving it.
Edmonton Centre.
I forgot to ask you what day they're going to start meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we have seen, this government, its ministers, cannot be trusted in the financial industry, and now new evidence from the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan shows the lack of accountability around certain insured health services. The report shows, Mr. Speaker, that the government is paying private labs over $97 million a year for pathology testing, and the minister in her comments on Friday expressed a concern that, in fact, she thought, too, that it was going up in a major way. Now, since we in the New Democrat caucus have argued long and hard for the better use of the provincial lab and for certain regional hospital services, I'm wondering what the immediate steps the Minister of Health is taking to ensure the better use of the provincial lab and regional hospital labs to curb the rising profits of Hanson, Strat, Casper, and other private for-profit labs.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Edmonton Centre is right that I did raise the issue, as did others, in the estimates on Friday. I think a couple of things need to be noted. First of all, with respect to the supplement which was provided to the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan earlier last week, it does indeed show a very marked increase in pathology lab services for the period to 87-88, for which was the time period of that supplementary information. As a result, the Utilization Committee, chaired by Dr. Watanabe, the Dean of Medicine of the University of Calgary, with his committee, is certainly looking at the issue of pathology services. In terms of what the government's response is beyond that, I outlined to the House on Friday the belief that this government has that there is a role for all types of laboratory services which exist at this point, including the provincial lab, hospital-based lab, and private labs. And the challenge before us is to ensure that each is aware of their role and how they can best benefit most efficiently the healthcare system in this province.
Well, as they reinvent the wheel, the last Utilization Committee report said that private labs upped utilization. I'm wondering, insofar as a member of the current Utilization Committee, Scott Rowand of Foothills Hospital in Calgary, has already indicated that millions of dollars are being wasted, for instance, on thyroid tests alone, and that many other tests are ordered needlessly. What concrete actions is the minister taking in light of these statements to monitor the tests that physicians are actually ordering?
Mr. Speaker, certainly the issue of what tests a physician orders is an important one, an important monitoring one, which is the primary area that the Utilization Committee is addressing. The other area is for Albertans to have the sense that they are being carefully or that they are able to access tests which they feel are needed. The question is whether the medical profession is ordering an appropriate number of tests, and that Albertans feel a sense of security about their access to health services. It is not simply all one way, as the member for Edmonton Centre would imply.
Well, the question was about thyroid tests that Scott Rowan said were wasting millions of dollars. Another angle to this, which is very disturbing, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering what steps the minister is taking to determine how many doctors are ordering tests to be done at private labs in which they have an ownership interest. How many doctors in this province have a conflict of interest when it comes to using those labs where they, in fact, are part owners?
Mr. Speaker, that gets back to the first question. The first question is, in my view, the most important one, and that is who does what. I am not, as a Minister of Health, out to try and abolish the services which private labs perform in this province. I am rather working to ensure that each has a sense of their role. As I said on Friday, we believe there is a role for hospital-based laboratory services, including a networking and a regionalization of other hospitals using hospitals' labs facilities, and pilot projects are underway in northern Alberta to test that model. In addition, private labs, we believe, and certainly the Utilization Committee has recommended in an interim report, that there be some that private labs be more identified with doctors' office needs and be used for those kinds of services. And finally, that the provincial lab be more on the specialized microbiology and the public health needs. In that way, what we are saying is there is a role for all of the factors. It is in the overlap of the role that I believe utilization may be affected and may be affected improperly, and ensuring who does what is the role of this government and what we are trying to do through the whole issue of utilization, not just in the pathology area.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo, followed by Highwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has stated that he knew nothing about FIC-AIC when he made the important decision to transfer responsibility for the investment contract companies from Consumer and Corporate Affairs to Treasury in June of 1986. Now, in a letter dated August 15, 1988, the provincial treasurer stated that the decision to transfer was taken with considerable thought, despite the fact the Premier has indicated that he didn't discuss it with anyone. And during examination of the provincial treasurer, Mr. Code pointed out that Consumer and Corporate Affairs has the mandate to protect investors, which it didn't do, while Treasury has the mandate to protect the province's finances. And I'm wondering whether the Premier can tell us whether he's standing by his statutory declaration that he had absolutely no information about the problems of IAC and didn't discuss them before he made that very important shift in portfolio responsibility in June of '86.
Mr. Speaker, obviously, we have a sworn testimony that is my position, and I only draw to attention to the honourable member of his profession that he is in, that he is asking a question hardly brings credit to him.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is making Silent Yoakum sound like a minor bird.
Thank you. Order, please, honourable member. Chair is also a bit concerned when there has been a fair amount of leniency given in this sitting with regard to repetitious questions because of the revised nature of question period. On the other hand, it is stretching it to the limit, the kind of same questions that are being asked time and time again, in spite of some of the preambles that are there. Some of the same questions are indeed being asked, in spite of your opinion, Calgary Mountain View. And so we need to have a little more care about these questions. Continue with the supplementary, Calgary-Buffalo.
And I'm wondering how the Premier reconciles a statement that he didn't discuss the transfer with anyone and didn't know about FIC-AIC problems with a provincial treasurer's statement that the decision to transfer was taken with considerable thought. Who's wrong?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I've replied to that already, and the honourable member obviously draws allegations that are not true.
Well, does the transfer, Mr. Speaker, in June 1986 signal that the Premier recognized that these companies at that time had become a serious problem, and that it was now time to transfer the problem to a department which was interested in protecting the finances of this province rather than protecting consumers.
Again, Mr. Speaker, that matter is dealt with fully in the statement which was made to Mr. Code. And again, I remind the honourable members it was Mr. Code's decision not to have me testify at in his hearings.
Highwood, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Mr. Speaker, a recent court decision in my part of the world in the Highwood constituency has been reported as suggesting unrestricted public access to grazing land. It has many people, particularly cattlemen in my area, upset and angry. For over 100 years, Mr. Speaker, many ranchers in my constituency have practiced responsible stewardship in their grazing areas. And yet, in a few hours of unrestricted access, four-wheel drives, dirt bikes, and all-terrain vehicles can do long-time irreparable ecological damage to those grazing areas. The question is, would the Minister explain what the government's position is to unrestricted access in the whole, and perhaps to the access trespass matter itself?
Mr. Speaker, this is a vitally important issue. There is a growing demand across this province for outdoor recreation, and that's resulted in far more frequent conflicts between recreationalists and landholders, whether it be lease or private landholders. The government action to this area that we've taken is that we've been working closely with the Alberta Cattle Commission, the Alberta Fish and Game Association, the Alberta Wilderness Association has also been involved to try and work out a position that's agreeable to all of the public groups. The process is ongoing and it's encouraging, and it calls for a great deal of common sense and on the part of all individuals to respect the rights of others, and hence the Use Respect program that we've had ongoing has been extremely effective, and we look forward to working with those groups to enhance and improve on that particular area.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the grazing leaseholders in my area would not challenge responsible and reasonable access. My question is to the Attorney General. Would he undertake to review this case with a view to appeal?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Speaker. I was discussing the matter with Page and I did not hear the question.
The Chair will respond the way it should have responded the other day with Edmonton Glengarry. Rephrase the question briefly.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, could the Minister of Agriculture give assurance that he will meet with cattlemen from the stock growers and the Cattle Commission to review the situation with a view to clarify the matter of access and trespass on grazing lands?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary. He was mentioned as the Minister of Agriculture. Thank you. Edmonton Jasper Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Recreation and Parks has before him a proposal for a 2,273-hectare ecological reserve on the east bank of the South Saskatchewan River near Medicine Hat. The Middle Sandhills Ecological Reserve was to be heard at a public meeting scheduled for June 26th this year. The government first announced the meeting was postponed due to the ill health of the chair, Mr. Don Klein. Later, the minister said he was studying the whole concept. More recently, the member for Cypress Redcliffe stepped in and said he had had it canceled on behalf of local interests that he represents. Can the minister clarify what exactly did happen with this meeting?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Ecological Reserve Program in the province of Alberta has been a very successful one to date. Since 1985, we have designated 11 sites. The process entails having a committee review the sites that have been identified and suggested by various groups throughout the province, and Middle Sandhills has been. But when I became minister, I wanted to have a look at all of these sites. There seemed to me that many of them needed the management updating of them and study of them. And so I have taken into consideration looking at the 11 that exist, and then going forward on the 3 that have already been dedicated, which isn't Midland Sands. There's 3 sitting there, I believe, Plateau Mountain, Ross Lake, and Rumsey ecological reserves that will take precedence over Middle Hill Sands.
Well, Mr. Minister, what about the notion that a private member is intervening on behalf of some others to have these meetings canceled? I mean, why can't people who have concerns about this proposal deal with them in the public meeting in the same way as everybody else, rather than working through the back door?
Well, I take exception, Mr. Speaker, the fact that somebody's working through the back door. I believe these are public review committees, but the individuals involved in the private lands in the area and in those public lands under Crown leases, grazing leases, do have a right to come forth to their member of the legislature with their concerns. And I hope that never changes in the province of Alberta or in a parliamentary democracy.
The point is that it's a public meeting which was canceled rather than postponed, and people in the area want to know why it is the process gets rushed along and changed as you go along when you're going to compromise the environment with the pulp mill. When it comes time to preserve the environment...
Order, please. Honorable. Thank you. This is the 3rd supplementary. This is not a learned discourse. This is the question, please, honorable member.
Question 90% out of my... I'll have to repeat the question. Why is it, when it comes to compromising the environment, say building a pulp mill, you rush along 90 miles an hour and change the rules as you go along? When it comes time to protect...
Thank you, honorable member. I guess we've got it. Thank you. The question is not too embarrassing. The question is too long. Could we have it succinct? Let's go. What's the question?
Why is it, when it comes time to compromise the environment, they can change the rules as they go along? When it comes time to protect the environment, they're always crossing I's, dotting T's, and canceling meetings. Exactly.
Yep.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to address that question. Alberta stands 3rd in Canada with 9.7% of its total area dedicated to ecological reserves, wilderness areas, provincial parks, and other designations. We have some 115 natural areas designated at the present time, and I believe that as we go forward and as I review the ecological reserve program, that we'll dedicate more in the future. But our track record stands in this country with designation of reserved areas and places for the future of this province, the heritage of this province, to see in long time in that future.
Calgary Northwest, followed by Bow Valley, then Bakerville.
Mr. Speaker, last week Technical Resources of Calgary was placed into receivership, and there's presently a plan to save the company and its 45 jobs through some financial restructuring. Now, a major shareholder in this company, Mr. Speaker, is the Government of Alberta, who holds $1.5 million worth of preferred Class A shares purchased in 1986 through a high-technology investment program administered by the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications. So my question is to the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications: what steps, if any, have been undertaken by the Minister's Department to attempt to ensure some return on this $1.5 million investment?
Mr. Speaker, we were of course very disappointed with the receivership of Technica. They have developed some very sophisticated technology, which is in the process of moving towards commercialization stage. I've asked my officials to meet with the company and with the receiver in order to completely assess the situation, to see exactly what the situation is and what can be done about it.
Thank you. Given that the holders of preferred Class A shares rarely, if ever, see any of their investment, what are the chances that we're going to get anything back of the $1.5 million investment?
It's too early to assess that, Mr. Speaker.
My final supplementary then, was there any consideration of a possible reinvestment or further investment in the company to shore them up over this current slump in the drilling industry and therefore protect our original investment, hopefully get our money back?
No such proposal has been made to me during my ministry.
Bow Valley, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. I've been given to understand that there's been a merger between Centennial Packers in Calgary and Lakeside Packers in Brooks. Could the minister indicate to the Assembly what kind of an effect this will have on the red meat industry in Alberta? Maybe.
Mr. Speaker, we view that as a very positive happening within the food processing sector, and as it does fall directly under the Minister of Agriculture, he may wish to supplement it.
Supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture, then, Mr. Speaker, does the minister feel that by this merger there will be some reduced competition when the companies are buying slaughter cattle?
No, Mr. Speaker. I would say by this merger we are creating another world-class plant in the beef packing industry with the ability to compete in the world marketplace.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister give us an indication whether the extra jobs created by the merger will be in Brooks or in Calgary?
Not at this point in time, I can't, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, member for Vegreville, followed by Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's only been about 9 months since the free trade deal has come into effect with the United States, and already the harmful effects of that deal are very obvious to people, whether you work at a glass plant in Redcliffe, Alberta, or work at a brewery in Lethbridge, or if you raise hogs in the province of Alberta. You realize that deal is hurting you and hurting you in a serious way. Now, on July 18th, the U.S. Commerce Department confirmed an earlier decision to impose another countervailing duty on imports of Canadian fresh, chilled, and frozen pork. And they not only confirmed it, Mr. Speaker, but they added to it. They increased it from 7.7 cents a kilogram to 8 cents a kilogram. And this couldn't come at a worse time for the hog industry, producers facing chronically low prices and rising feed costs, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to ask the Minister of Agriculture, in view of the statements that his colleague, the Minister of Economic Development, made, that this is just a temporary tax, when he's going to realize that hiding your head in the sand isn't going to make this thing go away, I'd like to tell him what impact assessments he's done to determine the immediate and long-term effects of this countervailing duty on the pork industry in the province of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I attempted to explain earlier in the House to the honourable member for Vegreville that what we're talking about here is in no way connected with the free trade agreement. The free trade agreement does not prevent either partner under that agreement from putting forward a countervail if they feel the other partner is participating in uneven subsidies. Keep in mind that the recent ruling still must go to, I believe, the Trade Commission in early September to determine what degree of hurt there is on the packing industry in the United States. If the Trade Commission reinforces the 3.6 cents per pound on our pork, then we have the right to appeal it under the dispute settling mechanism under the free trade agreement, or we have the right to appeal it under the GATT arrangement. But I would underscore, Mr. Speaker, this has absolutely nothing to do with the free trade agreement.
That's absolute nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We have the right to appeal.
We're into supplementary questions.
Does the Agriculture Minister not recognize that this countervailing duty was made possible by changes in U.S. law through the Omnibus Trade Bill, the very same bill that will make any sort of appeal through the free trade mechanisms fail as well?
Mr. Speaker, I would get the feeling the honourable member from Vegreville is now asking for a legal opinion. But I would reiterate that under the free trade agreement, you're attempting to create a level playing field, and there is nothing in it that prevents either partner from saying, hey, you're making your field unlevel. If we're convinced that we are, we may have to do some leveling out. But the last time I checked, we had strong support from the free trade agreement, from the packing industry. We had it from the Pork Marketing Development Corporation. We're currently working with those groups and with the other provinces and with the federal government to try to ensure that the ruling that comes down in September is favorable.
Mr. Speaker, if I wanted the legal opinion, he's the last person I'd ask. My third question to the minister, given the fact that the Alberta taxpayers have backstopped the Gainers meatpacking empire to the tune of $67 million, and that Gainers depends on exports to the United States for their financial well-being, I'm wondering what assessment this minister has done about the impact of this countervailing duty on the ability of Gainers to honor its commitments to the people in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, it's not my responsibility as Minister of Agriculture to get into the financial operations of companies. I would, though, again clarify the Minister for Vegreville and share with him that the packing house in Alberta that exports most of its surplus to the south is Fletcher's. Gainers, to a large extent, has a string of plants that run to the east.
Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Clover Bar, then Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Among the unfortunate examples, Mr. Speaker, of avoidable problems in our hospital system, perhaps none has been more shocking than the government's bungling over the disposal of hospital wastes. We have new state-of-the-art hospital facilities, Calgary and Edmonton, constructed without pathological and infectious waste disposal systems that meet our own standards. It's not confined to these new facilities, Mr. Speaker. A number of Alberta hospitals, old and new, are struggling with the problem. In the light of growing public awareness of environmental health and our right to know about the risk to public safety, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Minister of the Environment. To the Minister.
Fooled you.
Surprise. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is the report from the Tri-Departmental Task Force expected to be finished by the end of April? Is it now complete, and will it be made public in its entirety?
Mr. Speaker, the report has not been submitted to me, and when it is, I will take it under consideration, and as to whether it will be made public, well, I will take it through the appropriate cabinet committee, discuss it with my colleagues, and a decision will be made at that time.
You get a copy from your friends of John McKinnon.
Mr. Speaker, my supplementary question to the Minister is then, will the Minister undertake to this House that he will develop a comprehensive province-wide program to include waste from laboratories, veterinary clinics, public health clinics, and so on, and any other operation that generates sharps and pathological waste?
Mr. Speaker, not only is a provincial program being prepared, but indeed Alberta is working with departments of environments in other jurisdictions to develop a national policy and a code of ethics related to this matter, and that report is expected to be completed by the end of this year.
Mr. Speaker, that's good to hear. I think we're looking for a little action here, however. Will the government then, to the Minister, now consider changes to the regulations that will include stricter monitoring and enforcement of emission standards, landfill site controls, and transportation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, these are precisely the kinds of things that are under consideration now. Of course we will do it. Thank you.
Very quickly. Go for it. Minister of Health, very briefly.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to indicate that certainly the Department of Health has a very keen interest in this area. to balance off the public health of Albertans with the need to dispose of, and it's a need that's North America-wide, the reality of medical waste. I think we can point to the Department of Environment and their decisions that they have made to close down some of the incinerators and still make that balance exist. So there is a very key Department of Health role in this, and we are certainly working with the other departments involved to come up with some recommendations.
Overbar, followed by Edmonton Kingsway, then Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question is addressed to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities. I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, I should say I'm extremely pleased, Mr. Speaker, that I hear the announcement from the Minister about contemplated improvements to the 23rd Avenue and Highway 14 intersection in my constituency, where there have been some recent fatal collisions. Now, my question, will the Minister please explain how these changes to the intersection will in fact improve the safety of the travelling public?
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned the other day, there were two views that we were looking at. One was the short-term view of what we could do right now, and what was the long-term plan for the area that included the overpass at 45th Avenue. In response to the question relative to 23rd Avenue and Highway 14, the plan is to lengthen the southbound ramp for turning to the right, and then putting an island at the end. Now, there's two things that occur there. You get a separate movement of vehicles into a third lane away from the actual highway itself with the island that would be at the end of that. You shorten the space, if I can use that term, of the vehicle approaching Highway 14 to cross Highway 14 and lengthen that or reduce that to the 2 lanes instead of what had been the case of almost 3 lanes there.
Well, Mr. Speaker, would the Minister please explain to me how these improvements were decided upon, since the investigation after the fatalities is still in progress?
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned the other day, that was one of the suggestions that was given to us, and in our review of what needed to be done in the interim report that we received on Thursday of last week, the fact that we have a contract coming up in the area, and by attaching that work to that contract, we can do the work faster, more immediate, and save dollars at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister please indicate then if in the final report that will be coming, and I hope it will be coming soon, there will be some consideration for signalization of that intersection?
Mr. Speaker, certainly that has been a suggestion that has been passed on to us, and I assume it will be in the final report that I expect in about 3 days before the end of this week. And signalization is one of the items that has been identified for recommendation.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The code investigation was not the most powerful inquiry possible, as the Premier tried to claim last Wednesday. Rather, it was a limited investigation, well done as far as it went, to shield from public scrutiny the present Premier and the former Premier of this province. Can the Premier give this Assembly and the people of Alberta one good reason why they should accept his shoddy written testimony to the code investigation as the final word on his culpability in this fiasco?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is now, by his the lead-in to his question, really makes it kind of a worthless question.
Why? Order, please, honourable member. There's a real problem in terms of 409 and Beauchesne. The question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons within the House or out of it. And indeed, the preamble was in that area, so be careful with your supplementary.
I just stated some very obvious facts, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please, honourable members. When you review Hansard, as I'm sure you will do overnight, I think you then have to look at that in light of what you have just said. Could we just have the supplementary question?
If the Premier was ready to answer before the code inquiry, as he said a few minutes ago, why should he refuse to answer now? Just when did you know about the problems of FIC and AIC? When did you read your briefing papers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've told the honourable members, that All of these matters were before the Code Committee, Code Inquiry. Also, Mr. Speaker, I was available to testify. It wasn't my decision not to, and now the government has received the report, and the government will assess it and respond to it.
Okay. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that the Premier says that he was willing to testify before Code, and now he won't answer the simplest of questions in this, the highest...
Thank you, Honourable Member. You're completely out of order. Please pull out your Beauchesne and look at section 416, 1 and 2. You're out of order. You're out of order, and that's it. Thank you. The citation has been given to the member. He's been called to order. If you'd like to look up the citation while the rest of this goes on, it'd be appreciated. First, we'll deal with the various points of order that have arisen. On Friday in the House, the Associate Minister of Family and Social Services brought to the attention of the House a matter with regard to some comments made by the Honourable Member for Vegreville. In a review of Hansard, the Chair feels that the point of order was not sustained, that indeed the member for Vegreville did speak of the government in generic terms. Today we now will deal with first Edmonton Highlands, followed by Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I rose to make a point of order during the questions between the member for Redcliffe, Cypress, and the Premier, and I cite Beauchesne's 348 and 349 in particular, reminding the House that there is a section on the order paper just before question period entitled Ministerial Statements. Now, that section has been overridden day after day while various ministers attempt to have questions put to them by various government members through which they can make a statement to the House. Now, one might argue that that's kosher, and perhaps it is if breaking the rules all around is kosher. If that's the case, then maybe we should not be called to order under any circumstances, Mr. Speaker. Maybe there should be no limitation on the number of questions put, no limitation on the amount of time given over to reply, preambles, argumentative substance in questions, and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that time and again in this sitting of the Assembly, ministerial statements are being offered in the form of responses to questions in oral question period. I would make the case that either there are rules and they are fairly applied, or there should be no rules at all, Mr. Speaker, and await your deliberation on that matter.
Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Highlands is well aware that the rules for question period were established at the beginning of this session and agreed to by all parties. And those questions were to be asked in the way that we have proceeded during the last almost 2 months the Assembly has been in session. And I know that the honourable members of the opposition may not like the fact that private members who are not members of Executive Council in this chamber are asking questions in the House because they want to have the question period to themselves. Well, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that since the House began until the middle of July, till the 14th of July, 1,100 questions were asked, either by way of direct questions or supplementaries. 519 times, Mr. Speaker, do allow me the courtesy.
Because of it taking time.
519 questions were asked by the members of the NDP, 326 by the Liberal Party, and 255 by the government members who are not members of Executive Council. That is, Mr. Speaker, 32.
Please, Honourable Minister. The Chair doesn't need any other advice flowing through here. The member for Edmonton Highlands has given her point of order to the House. Excuse me. And I expect that we'll also then continue to be quiet so the Chair can hear what's going on. Thank you, Honourable Members.
The fact of the matter is that that works out to an average of 32 questions per members of the NDP, 41 questions per members of the Liberal caucus, and 8 questions per member of the government who are not members of Executive Council. Surely, Mr. Speaker, during the course of those many days that we have been here, 1,100 questions in all, the members of the NDP, official opposition, should hardly begrudge that limited number of questions being asked during the course of question period, and to guise the issue under the notion that the questions need not be out there to elicit facts. It strikes me as being particularly unusual, an argument on behalf of the member for Highlands. Therefore, it would seem to me that the attempt to cloak this point of order in one relating to the subject of ministerial statements is quite bizarre. And that's unfortunate, but it strikes me, Mr. Speaker, that the agreement which was arrived at and which the House has operated has not unduly influenced the ability of members of the NDP or the Liberal Party to ask the questions. It's quite clear. Well, the honourable member for Highlands may not like what I'm saying. It is quite often...
Thank you. Thank you. No one is recognized, Honourable Government House Leader, no one's recognized for a while, including yourself. Thank you for a moment. The Chair would like to point out that points of order are sufficiently complicated that one really doesn't need all the other kind of background music that's going on in the House. So perhaps the Honourable the Government House Leader could bring his remarks to a conclusion. And at the same time, remember, there is no such member in the House as Highlands. It's Edmonton Highlands.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands may not like what I'm saying, but I don't like what she says often either. Nonetheless, I respect the fact that she is entitled to make her arguments however she wishes to do so. The fact of the matter is, what the honourable member is trying to do is to prevent the honourable members of the Assembly who are not in the Executive Council from asking questions by purporting
to Edmonton Highlands. Enough is enough. If you persist in this, the Chair is going to be forced to name you to the House. Let's just... Oh. Thank you. If you're not prepared to listen to the admonition of the Chair. Thank you very much. This is not a back and forth chit-chat going on here. The other point to be brought out here is there's no point of order on a point of order, Edmonton Highlands, Beauchesne 318, subsection 1. Now, with respect to the purported point of order that we're engaged in at the moment, is there anyone from the Liberal caucus who wishes to speak to this item?
Mr. Speaker, being victimized by this type of ruling for so many times in the last 3 years, I can't let it go by. Surely with the size of caucus they have, Mr. Speaker, they can craft a question that is a question. But asking a puffball of the minister to go on, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, often reading a news release that he's put out that day is not what question period's for. This is what gets your goat more than anything else, Mr. Speaker. I know you're trying to keep an orderly House, but surely they can ask a question that the minister can answer without having to ask him read back a news release to him. And this is what we're getting out of question period, hour after hour. And if you would file, it's all right for the honourable member for Medicine Hat to say how many questions are asked by opposition members. But if you took time involved with the answer plus the puffballs asked plus the puffball answers, the opposition is finessed back into about 25 to 35% of the total elapsed time. Not the number of questions.
You got it.
Because
you got it.
It's the elapsed time that counts. And they're getting away with murder, Mr. Speaker. And this is all I want to get pointed.
There's nothing like more fun than having points of order any day of the week, I must say. First off, Westlock Sturgeon, with regard to elapsed time, I'm happy to read into the record the totals for the New Democrats, 626, for the Liberals, 399, for the Conservatives, 306. So I think that puts your comments somewhat at variance. This is the whole thing of stats. We're only too happy to supply the statistics to the House leaders of all parties at any time. With regard to the whole issue of ministerial statements, the chair has before had to deal with this issue, and the chair finds its hands tied. The chair cannot direct the government to issue ministerial statements to the House. The chair has communicated to the government from time to time the concern of other members in the House, and that's all that the chair can do with that at this point. With respect to all members of the House having equal opportunity to ask questions of the House, the chair still feels that is a fundamental aspect and responsibility of all members who've been elected to this legislature. And therefore, they're still allowed to ask questions no matter which political party they happen to represent in the House. The matter of the quality of a question is still a call of opinion, and at times it's perilously close no matter what part of the House the question arises in. Given today, it was an important issue to discover that there was this commission or this committee to be set up with regard to the Code of Ethics. And so the fundamental issue is correct. When you get down to the naming of the members, as was one of the questions, that's fine. To go on from there, the reporting process, that also would be fine. It's a question of how fast that occurs in terms of the asking of the question and the response given. As a matter of fact, the flow of question for you today was faster than usual. We dealt with 2 to 3 more questions than we normally would on any question period. So we take it as a complaint, and obviously sufficient discussion has been given to the House, and hopefully the government will take the further comments under advisement.
Just to follow up with clarification, Mr. Speaker, if I may, under the Section 348, can there be some discussion then with the House leaders? We don't bother having ministerial announcements anymore. I happen to know about this committee on Saturday. I expect at least that they'd come with a ministerial announcement. It seems to me that if there's no need for ministerial announcements, why have it's foolish to even have it in Beauchesne if we're not going to use it then.
That's right.
Indeed, the House leaders can meet with themselves at their own call, and failing that, the chair will send a notice to the House leaders and hope that they indeed will deal with this or any other outstanding matter. But that until those House leaders meet and confer, there's no point. I mean, they must meet first before they then come to the office of Speaker to see what the procedure will be. Thank you. Now then, we might move now to the member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking on a point of order relating to Beauchesne 409 sub 7 and our standing orders 23I. And the member from Edmonton Jasper Place and asking a question to the Minister of Recreation and Parks said certain phrases, and I guess we'll have to look at Hansard to get the exact wording. But as I heard him, I never said anything that in those words. So he's either quoting from something or somehow is suggesting that I've made certain comments which I haven't, and I think under those two quotes, Mr. Speaker, I ask for your ruling on them.
Well, for clarification, order please. For clarification, the initial draft of the Blues reads this way, as stated by the member for Edmonton Jasper Place, quote, "More recently, the member for Cypress Redcliffe stepped in and said that he had had it cancelled the meeting on behalf of local interests that he represents, close a quote.
Mr. Speaker, I think I was mentioned in a couple of the supplementaries, and I believe it was the second portion, not that portion.
Take this matter under advisement, examine the blues, the member for Cypress Raycliffe, the member for Edmonton Jasper Place. We'll deal with the matter tomorrow. Edmonton Kingsway. No. Pass. Leader of the Opposition. I assume that has been dealt with. Thank you. Might we have unanimous consent of the House to return briefly to the introduction of returns and reports? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to file 4 copies of a report of the 1989 World Blitz Chess Championship prepared by the Department of Tourism, myself, and my staff.
Thank you. Orders of the day.